So let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and to our friends and colleagues who are based in Asia or in Europe, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Central Asia Program seminars. My name is Sébastien Pérouse. I'm the director of the Central Asia Program at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at George Washington University. So, as you all know, Russia has been facing unprecedented sanctions from the United States, from the European Union, and from other countries since it launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. These sanctions target Russia's key sectors, such as energy, finance, defense, technology, and as well as its political and military elites. But Russia also has been trying to evade and undermine the sanctions by various means, such as using proxies from companies, sub-countries, and alternative markets. So in this event, our goal is to explore how Russia is able to circumvent the sanctions in Central Asia. What are the implications and consequences of this practice for the region, and what can be done to prevent or counter that? So we also discuss the role and perspectives of the Central Asian countries themselves, who are caught betraying their loyalty to Russia and their interest in maintaining good relations with the rest of the world, including with the West. And to do that, we have a very distinguished panel of experts today with Leila Nazgul Seyitbek, Thomas Main, and Nurul Rahimbek, who they were going to share their insights and analysis on this topic. So each speaker will have about 15 minutes to present their views. Their presentations will be followed by a Q&A session so please don't hesitate to send us your question in the chat box. So thank you all for being with us today. And our first speaker will be Thomas Main. Thomas is a research fellow at the University of Oxford and a former visiting fellow at Chatham House, or at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. He's a former senior campaigner at the anti-corruption NGO Global Witness, where he was responsible for the group's reports on Central Asia and Eurasia. He authored many reports on corruption and kleptocracy and on the UK's anti-money laundering regulations. I would like to recommend the excellent report he published on Turkmenistan, by the way, which is entitled Turkmenistan, a Model Kleptocracy, and which is available on the website of the NGO Crude Accountability, crudeaccountability.org. And Tom's recent work analyzed the UK's unexplained wealth order legislation and the corrupt property purchase of Uzbekistan's Gulnara Karimova. So again, thank you all for being with us, and Tom, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks for the invitation to speak. I'm going to set the scene a little bit by talking more generally about sanctions and the picture we have on Central Asia. Now, one of Joe Biden's campaign pledges when he was running for president in 2020 was putting the fight against dark money at the heart of his agenda. Now, we can't say the same, unfortunately, for the governments of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak here in the UK. But since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the UK has upped its game, passing various bits of legislation and sanctioning over 1,000 entities and people from Russia. Now, we should remember there are three types of sanctions that we can utilize. There's, of course, the Russia-specific sanctions, so anyone involved in destabilizing Ukraine or threatening its sovereignty, or anybody associated with such an individual. But we mustn't forget also we have the global Magnitsky sanctions, anybody involved in human rights abuses or corruption, and the UK and EU equivalents of that. In the UK, it's called the Global Anti-Corruption Sanctions Regime and the Global Human Rights Sanctions Regime. So we do have a quite broad structure of sanctioning, both here and in the US, for a variety of abuses. And yet, despite that, only 2 people have been sanctioned in the United States, and zero here in the UK from Central Asia. Those two people being Raimbek Matrimov, the former customs official from the Kyrgyz Republic, and Gulnara Karimova, the famous daughter of the Uzbek president, neither of whom were sanctioned in relation to Russia, but for corruption in their own countries. This is despite the fact in the region, of course, we have, Sebastian mentioned it, Turkmenistan, one of the most corrupt countries in the world, despite the fact last year we had 220 people killed in Kazakhstan. So why is this? And we're going to delve in a little bit into that in my presentation. Other speakers will speak a little bit more about the facilitation of evasion, sanctions of evasion. But I am going to look at several examples specifically to Russia. First up, we have Kenez Rakishev, a Kazakh businessman. We've known for years that Rakishev has been an associate of the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. He's sponsored, or his company has sponsored, Kadyrov's football team. Rakishev's company may have, or Rakishev himself may have gifted Kadyrov a private jet. So these acts clearly show him to be an associate of Kadyrov, who is sanctioned. So therefore, Rakishev could be sanctioned himself, and yet that hasn't happened. And lo and behold, what do we read in the last few weeks? That Rakishev's company may have supplied military vehicles to Chechen forces that have been involved in the invasion of Ukraine. So there we have very clear evidence that needs to be investigated, and I see no reason if that evidence is shown to be correct, that Rakishev and his entities should they should be sanctioned. Also, we have Timur Kulibayev, the son-in-law of the former president of Kazakhstan. Kulibayev has made hundreds of millions of dollars over the years in dealings with Russia and Russian companies. He was a Gazprom board member from 2011 to March 2022, stepping down pretty much as soon as the Russian invasion happened. You can't get a more establishment figure than being on the board of Gazprom. And we're hearing over the last few months allegations that perhaps Kazakh oil is making its way to Russia. And as we know, Kulibayev is a key member, if not the key figure in the Kazakh oil industry. So those allegations need to be investigated, and sanctions need to be issued if appropriate. And thirdly, we have Timur Tulov, another businessman, of the CEO of the rather mysterious Freedom Holding, a brokerage firm based in Almaty, also listed on the US stock exchange. So that's important to note. Tulov says that the company's business in Russia has been sold. We're not sure if that is entirely accurate. Furthermore, he's said that he continues to do business in Russia, albeit with people and entities who have not been sanctioned. But he has been sanctioned by Ukraine. So if he has been sanctioned by Ukraine, that is a good reason to really look at this individual and to see whether he should be also sanctioned in the US, in the UK. So there's just three examples of figures controlling literally billions of dollars who possibly could be sanctioned and have not been. And of course, there are far more individuals who could be. I refer people to Dame Margaret Hodges' speech in the UK Parliament last year, where she named around 30 individuals from Kazakhstan who possibly could be sanctioned in relation to corruption. And yet none of these individuals have been sanctioned. Why is that? I think I'm going to speak here a little bit more about the UK side of things. I think the US side perhaps follows this pattern as well. I just know more about the UK side of things. one of the reasons we often hear in conversations with officials is that, well, we don't sanction our friends. We don't want to alienate allies, especially an ally like Kazakhstan that we're trying to get on the side in this fight against Russia. But the whole point of sanctions is that they target individuals and not regimes. So business can continue, we can get our oil and gas or whatever, while we send a message that corruption of certain types and certain individuals won't be tolerated. I think also with Kazakhstan specifically, there's perhaps an argument which says something like, well, excuse me, because of the political turmoil we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, we need to see where the chips are going to fall before we start trying to issue sanctions. But by not acting, there's a risk that the chips may fall in the wrong place. And already we're seeing figures from the old regime, Nurali Aliyev, the grandson of the former president, come back into positions of power in business and elsewhere. And so turning a blind eye to corruption, to sanctions evasion, I think can only lead to further destabilization down the road. I think the best example of this is the book Thieves of State by Sarah Chase, who is an expert in Afghanistan, and she basically says, if you ignore, and this was written before the Taliban, retook the country. If you turn a blind eye to corruption, you're basically creating, a situation as has been proven is what's happened in Afghanistan in the last few years. So we definitely need to see more sanctions on not just people who are facilitating the destabilization of Ukraine, but also just general corruption and human rights abuses in Central Asia. But just pulling the camera out a little bit wider to end my presentation, I think we need to also start looking at what comes next after sanctions, because we know that sanctions are only a temporary tool. They're a political tool, and it's temporary. So when the Russian aggression ends, hopefully soon, a lot of those sanctions will be lifted, and those assets that have been previously frozen will return to those individuals for them to use in the next atrocity or the next political campaign. So we really need to start looking at ways how we can move from just freezing an asset to actually seizing it. Now, this is a very complex topic, lots of different viewpoints. We need to consider about the rule of law and respecting private property and all that. But the issue is, in order to seize a property, you need to prove on the balance of probabilities that it has been acquired through illegal conduct. The problem we have is that when the UK authorities, for example, mount an investigation, they need to get information and evidence from Central Asia in this case. And clearly, Kazakhstan, for example, is not really going to assist in an investigation of a high-ranking official or member of the president's family. So there have been moves in recent years to try and counteract this. The unexplained wealth order legislation, for example, in the UK, was quite innovative in that it says that if there is no information about a particular asset, that itself can be used as evidence that illegal conduct has taken place, and the asset can be frozen. But unfortunately, in one famous case against Dadiga Nazarbayeva, the daughter of the then president of Kazakhstan, the case was dismissed because the judge accepted evidence from the Kazakh prosecutor's office, who said that all of Dadiga's assets were lawfully acquired. Now, of course, the Kazakh prosecutor, especially in 2019, is going to say that. So it kind of defeats the purpose of the unexplained wealth order legislation in the first place if you're going to accept the word of a country where there the legal system and the police are not independent. So there's a lot of work to go. Maria Nitzero from RUSI has produced a paper on this topic about various ways we could do this by perhaps looking at that as kleptocracy as a kind of organized crime, and once somebody gets identified as a member of a kleptocratic network, that would in itself be evidence that assets would be have been illegally acquired. But I think that is what we need to do, because at the moment we have this basically this situation where we have kind of legalized illegal activity where the assets have been stolen, and they're being put into the UK, and we can't do anything about it. So generally, perhaps not a very positive picture, but hopefully it's one that, as time goes by, we can hope that both the US and UK authorities start to take Central Asia a little bit more seriously, and not viewing it as some kind of non-priority area that we can ignore. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Tom. Our second speaker will be Leyla Nazgul Seidbek. Leyla is an exiled lawyer and anti-corruption and human rights advocate from the Kyrgyz Republic, and she was granted asylum in Austria in 2021. And she's currently the chairwoman of Freedom for Eurasia, which documents and reports on human rights and corruption abuses in the former Soviet republics of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Leyla, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So it has been over a year since the West has imposed sanctions on Russia, and they range from oil price cap to expulsion of Russian banks from SWIFT banking system. And these sanctions are unprecedented in their scope. The goals of the sanctions were to prevent the use of dual-use technology, to prevent the military and paramilitary equipment falling into the hands of Russians, and to prevent the sale of refinery mining technology. And just generally selling things like semiconductors or other microelectronics to Russia, which it can then use on the battlefield in Ukraine. The other goals of the sanctions were to demonstrate the unity of the European and US, European states, the US, the UK, and the other allies in their resolve to stand against the Russian aggression. They were also aimed at damaging the Russian economy and degrade the Russian military capabilities. And since that time, since the first sanctions were imposed, there have been vibrant debates going around on whether they're as effective as the West has originally hoped. And I can say that, according to my opinion, when they were first introduced last year, these sanctions were actually pretty effective. But as time has went on, Russia seemed to have been able to adjust to the new circumstances, and they have found new sneaky ways to evade export controls and to reroute their supply chains through countries like Central Asian states. The Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan were named in some reports, and there were Armenia and Georgia, and also the larger economies such as Turkey, China, Hong Kong, UAE were also named as platforms where Russia is sourcing things that they need to continue their war and to continue to keep their economy going, basically. So as a result, eventually Russia started importing more things that originate in the West, and they have learned to set up these front companies in various jurisdictions that aren't under sanctions, which in turn re-export these items to Russia. They have also learned, small things that made these schemes possible, such as that some European producers and the producers in the US and other countries that have supported the sanctions, they refuse to work with companies if they see that a representative or a beneficiary of the company is a Russian national. So they increasingly started using proxies who are nationals of these jurisdictions where they have these front companies. But we also have seen situations where some European firms actually have been openly dealing with Russia and continue supplying machinery even, and machinery of the type that is prohibited, supplying these things to Russia directly. There are also some things that we believe need to be researched more and looked into, and these are the exceptions, such as, for example, the situation with the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which is not sanctioned, but it relies largely on Russia, and we don't know what's going on with the oil there at all. So why do we have this problem of enforcement of sanctions in Central Asia, for example? And as Tom has mentioned, obviously, the main reason why there is this enforcement problem is because of corruption. We have known for years now that Central Asian states are kleptocracies. They are countries where rule of law basically does not exist. They don't follow the laws, despite of whatever they promise to the Western partners. They never hold to their promises. And we also have to keep in mind that Russia itself has a rich history of using illicit networks and schemes ever since Soviet and post-Soviet times. They have vast experience in collaborating with criminal organized networks. And Central Asia itself also has a very robust smuggling architecture that has been in place before the war. And I can bring up one such example. That is an example of a smuggling. How do I even call it? Is a smuggling syndicate, and their name is Abdulkadir. They originate from China. It's an Uyghur family, and they have been operating in Central Asia for many years, and organized crime and corruption reporting project, and its partners has reported on this extensively over the years. So this criminal network even owns customs terminals and checkpoints around Central Asia, and they have been smuggling various goods for years and for the Russian market. So they possess this very valuable currently experience, skills, and resources to support these smuggling routes for Russia now. And I'm afraid that we are yet to still see the damage that such networks can cause in the coming months. So unless anything is done to address the issue of these networks, I see that chasing after the facilitators and enablers will probably be a pretty difficult job. But nonetheless, it needs to be done because it's basically putting the sanctions goals under risk. And the same thing is also happening. We see with the oil supplies. We have read reports about Russian oil being reloaded on various tankers. There were reports about Russia buying up old tankers and creating its own fleets. And they've been just hauling Russian oil around, relabeling it, mixing it with other oils from other unsanctioned jurisdictions. And as Tom again has mentioned in his presentation, there are financial service providers in Central Asia that have been supporting Russia ever since the start of the war. And the individual that has been mentioned, Timur Turlov, he has actually been openly advertising his bank to customers at the sanctioned Russian banks, that they can funnel their funds from the sanctioned bank, for example, the Alpha Bank or VTB or Tinkoff, to his banks, or else he was also offering, so he's still offering the services of funneling these funds into US stock markets. His bank was, and not just his, there were several others as well. They were offering services to Russian sanctioned individuals as well to open bank accounts and supply them with Visa or MasterCards in order to enable them to continue life as as they have had before the sanctions. And it's quite shocking that this bank and Turlov, for example, is actually doing it right under the noses of U.S. authorities, unfortunately. So that is something that also needs to be addressed. Again, the countries, for example, such as the Uzbekistan is sheltering, excuse me, is sheltering Alisher Usmanov, who has been sanctioned as well. And he has not only found a safe harbor there, but he is also doing business and building new factories and plants. We have received just recently reports, unofficial reports, that he launched construction of a titanium plant in Karakalpakstan. So I think in the coming months we should focus more on the implementation of the sanctions, and especially on bringing those responsible for committing, enabling, facilitating the sanctions evasion to justice. And also, as Tom has said, it would be good to see also some concrete cases being opened against individuals that are known, whose names are known to the public. Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Leila. So our third speaker will be Nurul Rahimbek, who is a political activist and researcher from Kazakhstan living in exile in Ukraine since 2015 and in the US since 2022. Nurul has worked with the National Democratic Institute and with the International Republican Institute on programs for promoting democracy in Central Asia and Ukraine. And he has done a lot of work in establishing the first election observation institution in his country. And since 2004, he has authored many publications on democracy in Kazakhstani and Ukrainian media, and he currently represents the Kazakh Civil Society Coalition in the United States, and his recent work and research is focusing on asset recovery and sanctions evasion. Noor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sebastian, and good morning to everyone. I would like to focus a little bit on loopholes actually that exist, and there's like a number of loopholes that I will be talking about. And of course, going a little bit into details of what previous speakers have mentioned. While talking about loopholes that are used to evade sanctions, we should not forget about the structures that there are in place. There's the Eurasian Economic Union that is being used, exploited by the countries of Central Asia, as the movement of goods and supplies is exempted from custom duties. And this makes actually the re-export as one of the favorite ways to evade sanctions, very, very easy way of getting goods into the Russia. Same with all other trade legislative frameworks geared towards helping Russia to evade sanctions. We cannot say that there's actually a well-coordinated effort to support Russia among Central Asian countries. A clear-cut example would be like various stance of Central Asian countries on the Eurasian Economic Union on Russia, sanctions itself. Kazakhstan, for example, claims to respect the sanctions, but at the same time refuses to drop economic cooperation with Russia. Kyrgyzstan also promises to respect sanctions on the country level, but admits that there's a handful of private companies who might not. So movements of goods to China through Kyrgyzstan, stopped at the borders with Kazakhstan, as we see right now. It's a moment again, and it's mentioned about this water crisis, which probably is used as more as an excuse where Kazakhstan is trying to sort of retain the face as it's trying to sit on the both chairs. It is still evident that both Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan will continue flooding Russia with goods under the sanctions regime. And Kazakhstan is also, if you talk about Kazakhstan, you know, it's doesn't the fact of the military equipment actually is moving through Kazakhstan that recently has been recorded. It moves from China through the whole of Kazakhstan to Russia. There's been videos posted, and we all see the examples of how it's going on. Or, for example, fact of skyrocketing increase of dual-purpose electronic re-exported goods. This not only concerns Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. We can also talk about similar cases from Uzbekistan, to a lesser extent from Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. And we've been talking already about Alisher Usmonov, and you know that he's still assisting a Russian defense industry. But at the same time, on this sad note, I will say that there should be also, and there is existing a window of opportunity. Since recently civil society started talking about recommendations to create a system of monitoring, effective monitoring for compliance of sanctions, including the public. Another example that I could bring to the table is that under the pressure of the civil society in Kazakhstan, the new law on returning stolen and exported assets was initiated by several independent members of parliament in Kazakhstan, which later was set in place by the president. This law is supposed to strip assets from oligarchs connected to the ex-authorities who are actually engaged in the sanctions evasion process. I understand that this piece of legislation still has a lot of flaws and a lot of loopholes. It is not clear how, for example, if assets are returned and when they're returned will be appropriated within the country. General prosecutor is giving endless powers to do that, and it should not be general prosecutor. We will put aside this issue and look at what is done on the legal part in the West. While the US and the EU recognizes that Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries cannot stop trade with Russia all at once, and it was already mentioned during the discussion today. It has a legal basis under the which Central Asian countries at least will be aware of what they are falling for. What can I mention? In US, Section 6807 of the National Defense Authorization Act requires semi-annual assessment of the effects of sanctions imposed by Russia, on Russia, sorry. The Director of National Intelligence is required to submit a report outlining Russia's efforts to circumvent sanctions with regimes of certain countries. Unfortunately, we also have situations when there's an Enablers Act as part of NDAA requiring anti-money laundering investigation of finances entering the US financial system was struck off by the Senate. We hope it will come back into the picture again soon. Also, the 11th package of EU sanctions states that it was going to introduce criminal liability for persons helping Russia to evade sanctions. The European Union is discussing a new mechanism for sanctions against the countries of Central Asia, which according to the EU help Russia to evade sanctions. It comes also to my memory that Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in the US has not long ago identified a list of 18 countries that help Russia, including Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. In 2023, this list has already narrowed down to 5 countries, still including Kazakhstan. To a certain extent, I would say that there's some effect happening. Like OFAC, for example, have sanctioned companies in 3 Central Asian countries, 3 in Kazakhstan, 4 in Kyrgyzstan, and I think 4 in Uzbekistan. Those are mainly Russian subsidiaries of banks, logistical companies, and high-tech companies. But overall, and again, to the point of our discussion today, we still can observe that all statements made by the leaders of the Central Asia, specifically Tokayev in this case, that he will comply with the sanctions. It's total bluff. Tokayev is carefully hiding official statistics and maintains minimum transparency. We believe that everything Tokayev says is in strict agreement, and not only Tokayev, leaders of other Central Asian countries, it's a strict agreement with Kremlin. But now when we talk about oligarchs, it's becoming even worse. Russian oligarchs are being helped by the oligarchs from the other Central Asian states. Sanctions against specific enterprises which are prohibited from supplying or cooperating with them are intended to prevent the production of high-tech weapons. It is the oligarchs who finance actually the channels of the supply of prohibited equipment and elements of Russia through their enterprises. And we are talking about the allies of Russian oligarchs in Central Asia who help them evade sanctions to supply it through their countries under the cover of products they actually need themselves. Having received it, they launder the supplier and ship the goods further to Russia with a substantial premium, so that no one thinks that it is done out of friendship. We believe there's fewer Kazakh oligarchs than Russians, but the Russian oligarchs, but they are just as rich. In the same way, they got entire sector of the economy, huge natural resources, and virtually disenfranchised workers at their disposal. Those who own iron, steel, chemical plants, what they do, they just supply the products to the factories in Russia who are producing also the same stuff, same steel, aluminum, copper, uranium, chromium, everything which is needed to manufacture guns, tanks, and aircraft. So all Kazakh oligarchs are involved in corruption at the highest level, highest government level. We recognize that. They are the agent carriers of such corruption, its distributors, creators, and beneficiaries. The civil society coalition and many NGOs, not only Kazakh, but also international, have investigated the activities of several dozens of the country's richest people, the characters on the Forbes magazine list. Kazakh democratic organizations and international NGOs have prepared and submitted to US government agencies authorized to impose sanctions dossiers on the most important and dangerous Kazakh oligarchs. Submissions are done through the forms with access to the information to hundreds of open
Okay, I'm afraid we lost Nurul. Okay, so maybe we'll move to some questions when Nurul can join us again. Yeah. Tom and Leila, you can hear me, right? Okay, all right. So I'm sorry, we lost Nurul. I mean, he can finish his presentation if he can come back, hopefully, to our event. So maybe first, okay, he's back.
Hello.
Nurul?
Hello. Yeah.
We sorry, we lost you for a couple of minutes, so we're really sorry.
Okay, that's no problem. So what I'm trying to say, it's necessary to start imposing sanctions on these characters, on these oligarchs, who will instantly try to get out of control the industrial empires and transfer control to their managers who later become their cronies in running those industries. Let me give you a few examples. Eurasian Resources Group manages the following production assets in Kazakhstan: Kazakh-Chrome, Sokolova-Sarbaysky Mining and Processing Association, Aluminum of Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan Electrolysis Plant, and Eurasian Energy Corporation. The company products have for many years been supplied to Russian military sector plants in the Ural region and Siberia, in particular. The Magnitogorsk Iron and Steel Works, which produces steel for guns and other military equipment. The sanction imposed on consumers of ERG products forced the company to officially terminate supply contracts with Russian companies. But supplies continue to go the same address because ERG still owns a huge 5 billion share in Russian banks. Deliveries are made with falsified documents, sometimes under the cover of fertilizers or under the cover of ore that is sent to Russian plants for processing or enrichment. And recently we have faced actually very interesting phenomenon, and that is actually Russians buying shares in the largest industries in Kazakhstan. If we look at the nuclear power industry, the following UK registered companies, Givol UK Limited and its two subsidiaries, Gamberg and Gexior UK Limited, have recently sold assets valued over 1.5 billion to the Russian company Rosatom, which funded the purchase of a share in Kazakh uranium mining company using a loan from Gazprom Bank, a sanctioned Russian entity. And this is by far not the only case. We have now in society in Kazakhstan going on discussion about Karaganda metallurgical plant, which is also about to be there's ArcelorMittal group that is running plant currently, and a Kazakhstani side is doing everything possible to kick this group out of the plant and to pass it to the Russian side. So there's a lot of debates going on now in the society. And lastly, the third main loophole in it's the relocation of Russian business, and we have started the previous speaker Tom and Leila have mentioned about Timur Tolarov case, but I would like also to mention one more case. It's this group called Polymetal, run by brothers Alexander and Vitaly Nessis, who are the main shareholders of this company. They are producing gold, silver, and rare earth metals. Those rare earth metals which is used for aviation, missile, submarines, and other equipment, military equipment. So what they did is the scheme is like that. Polymetal key management is resigning from their roles in Russia and re-establishing, opening a new enterprise in Kazakhstan. So they have resigned from their positions and opened Polymetal International PLC, which is heavily engaged in supplying Russian military industry. And of course, as it was mentioned, Turlov is a very, very big issue right now for Kazakhstan. The person who has outdone in a short time period Wall Street sharks, like Hindenburg research shows that there is evidence confirming that freedom evades sanctions and shows signs of fake revenue. He's made billions of dollars within short period of time. So even it goes further. On August 4th, 2023, the company openly admitted it provided brokerage services to certain individuals and entities who are subject to sanctions imposed by OFAC, the European Union, or the United Kingdom. And they bluntly stated in their open sources in the latest annual report. So on this word, I would like to believe and work for the fact that as a result of the war between Russia and Ukraine, such as unhealthy phenomenon as oligarchs in Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries will disappear. All mentioned countries need a free market and competition and more than places of honor on Forbes list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nurul. Thank you all for your presentation. So we have about 15 minutes for discussion. So I got many questions. I have myself questions. I'm just going to start with a very specific question for Nurul, as you were the last speaker. So you mentioned several companies and persons in Kazakhstan. Are any of them related to or under Samruk Kazyna?
Samruk Kazyna?
Yeah.
Sorry, I heard Samruk Casino.
No,
Samruk Kazyna, yeah, it's Samruk Kazyna. It's a like entity that was founded by Nazarbayev himself, and like I would say, all the threads lead to Nazarbayev in this particular case. And I've mentioned some names related to actually the industries that are producing resources, and one of the one of the groups is Eurasian Group. They own a lot of plants, as I mentioned, and they have access to the file. They had access always. They've been always managers of Nazarbayev's resources. So basically, that is the first group that I would mention have relations to the Samruk Kazyna.
Thank you. So let's move maybe now to more general questions for the three of you. One of the questions is actually focusing more on the role of the United Kingdom and of the European Union. And the question is, how could the United Kingdom and the European Union step up their sanctions in the region? And do you think they could have more impact given the more extensive business relations between Europe and Central Asia?
I can take this first, Sebastian, if you want.
Sure.
I think the problem the UK has, or had, or probably still has, is that we were working from a very low knowledge base. We know that after Russian invaded, people were shifted to work on Russian sanctions who knew very little about either sanctions or Russia. It was just it was the necessity of the time. So when you say, well, what do we have on Central Asia, you can only imagine that the knowledge base there is even lower. And we have heard about funding cuts to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, cuts to the National Crime Agency. So how do we how do we reverse that? Well, I think one way is just by trying to investigate and maybe even with some very clear-cut examples, putting those out there, putting them on the record, and showing the governments of Central Asia that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. There's that question I think we've been debating a little bit today about, is this incompetence of the Central Asian governments with things happening behind their back, or is it actually active with them doing it with full knowledge? But either way, and we don't necessarily need an answer to that question, I think just by shining a light on this kind of stuff, once it gets publicized, once a few people are sanctioned, I think that will in itself kickstart, I think, change, however small, in Central Asia.
Thank you, Tom. Maybe a question now. Oh, go ahead, Leila. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that thought that Tom has mentioned. Whether or not these countries are willingly or maybe unwillingly facilitating or enabling the sanctions evasion, that's a very good question. But there are reports about, for example, Kyrgyzstan actually closing down the access to the website that provided information to the investigative journalists, where they were able to see the deliveries to the supplies to Russia, for example, basically by item. And they have closed that down. Did they do it willingly? I'm pretty sure they did. Although the official position was that they are doing these works within the frameworks of some household management projects or something, and that they're rearranging their website or their database and whatever. But there are also other things connected to that. And for example, the question is, are these countries willingly not following the international law? And we know they haven't been for many, many decades. The recommendations that are being given to them by their partners in the West, or whatever recommendations they even receive within the UN system, do they actually try to fulfill them? I haven't seen many of those examples where we can actually commend and say, oh, wow, this is great. Tajikistan has actually implemented all of those recommendations, and there is actually an improvement. I haven't seen any of such examples at all. So do I think that these countries are going to follow through with the sanctions or will actually put an honest effort into stopping the invasion? I don't think so.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Leila. Next question is, so each of you mentions the ineffectiveness of the sanctions applied by the EU and the US to countries to help circumvent Russian sanctions. And each of you also talked about corruption and oligarchs like Turlov, Rakishev, Kulibayev. But you don't mention the ability of oligarchs to circumvent sanctions solely through the patronage of state authorities, and personally Tokayev, Japarov, and all the top officials of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So what list of personal sanctions would you propose?
Well, this is the crux of the question, and we're told by the US and in the UK implicitly, really, that they're not going to sanction. They don't sanction heads of state as a matter of course. So what do you do when, as the question suggests, people just have that state backed deal, and the money flows on regardless? Personal sanctions can only go so far. I think that's why I'm talking about actually trying to, well, number one, don't do these deals in the first place, but that's not going to happen. But two, start to look at actually, really hitting some of these guys with seizures, seizing assets rather than freezing. But I think the question is apt, because ultimately there's, I think, only a certain amount of effectiveness of these personal sanctions, and that's the nature of the beast. What was the first thing that the EU did when there was the issue with Russian gas? It went to Azerbaijan and shook hands with Aliyev, one of the most corrupt kleptocrats in the world. So and there's no solution. So there's no solution to that, and that's just unfortunately a part of the geopolitical situation. I don't like to see those deals, but I don't have a solution.
Anyone wants to add anything on that? Leila? No.
No, I just agree with the situation, and basically it's also a question of resources that civil society has. When it comes to effectiveness, you have to attack all the legs of octopus. Otherwise, they will find another hole to escape. They will always find another manager to hire, another relative, babushka, dedushka, friend, brother, sister. So it's just a matter of combination of all resources and common efforts to actually address and seriously approach this situation. So that's my stand on this.
I'm going to add also that any problems that we are currently having, this war including, is a result of a kleptocracy. The problem of Central Asian states serving as this loophole is a result of them being a kleptocracy, is a result of non-existence of the laws, is a result of reluctance of the authorities to enforce the laws, and that it basically goes, contrary to their vested interests, basically. So unless we start addressing the, wider problem of kleptocracy, I mean, whacking them all is a good thing to do, which also needs to be done, I guess, and going after each one firm and each individual who is evading or is connected to evasion of sanctions is a good thing. It's important to do. But then, bigger issues need to be solved as well. And what are we doing with the kleptocracies? What are we doing with organized criminal networks? Because I mean, we have situations where, for example, there is this criminal leader in Kyrgyzstan. His name is Kamchibek Kurbayev. Everybody knows him. He has been sanctioned by the United States for many years, but his children are studying or were studying in the UK in the best schools. Nobody questioned it. He's using, various resources in the EU, and I mean, who cares, right? Yeah, he's sitting in Kyrgyzstan. He's not going to the US, but maybe he doesn't really need to because he still has access to all of those nice things. So, yeah, I mean, maybe try to look at the wider picture.
Yeah, thank you, Leila. Maybe a question I received on to know more about the impact of the sanctions on Central Asia, and despite the fact that they're circumvented, but still, what more than 500 days since Putin's war started in Ukraine, can we assess more precisely how the Western sanctions impact the trade and economic relations between Russia and Central Asia, and what are the main sectors and products involved in the sanction-busting activities? Anyone? Yeah, Tom, please.
No, I was just going to say I'll let my my colleagues from Central Asia take this one if they can.
Leila, or Nurul, any thought on that?
Yeah, I was trying to reread the question from the chat, but I'm not seeing it. Can you read?
No, I received it directly. No, the question is, can we assess more than 500 days since Putin's war started in Ukraine? Can we assess more precisely how the Western sanctions are impacting the trade and the economic relations between Russia and Central Asia?
Oh, how what the impact is between Central Asia and Russia in terms of trade? Oh, I think it's booming.
Right.
It's definitely booming. If anything, Central Asian entities, I mean, some of them are probably existing companies, and the others were newly opened by various, people who are looking to profit off of this war really quickly. And some of them were, according to reports, opened by FSB in cooperation with a local businessman, perhaps. So they are really, really using this platform. So yes, the trade between Central Asia and Russia is actually growing, and I would say it's going to skyrocket in the next months if nothing is urgently done.
Thank you. Another question that Nurul actually briefly mentioned, but how do the sanctions impact the existing regional organizations which are under Russian or even Chinese domination? So first, of course, the Eurasian Economic Union, but also maybe the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations. And what are the limitations, obligations for the members of the Eurasian Economic Union in aiding Russia? So basically, also, how do they impact the Eurasian Economic Union?
So basically, okay, let me start on this question, and if my colleagues would add also, there are certain laws that support Eurasian Economic Union cooperation. And once you become a member, you are, dedicated to follow those principles, those rules. The benefits that the countries get is not always equal. There's been complaints also from Kazakh side, for example, that although there's like supposed to be zero customs duties, but still it's still unequal. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that there is certain amount of obligations that countries have to follow within those big structures. And that is why I mentioned that in my speech, that Eurasian Economic Union is one of the structures that allows sanction evasion process to flow freely. So that's my point of view on this.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. I mean, unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of this event, but maybe I'm going to give you a chance to wrap up with a kind of concluding question, which would be, so looking ahead, what potential countermeasures could Western countries adopt really to enhance the effectiveness of the sanctions? And especially, are there lessons that can be learned from similar situations in other regions? And please feel free to add, each of you, anything if you wish to conclude.
I just want to touch on, I just saw it in the chat. Nigel mentioning a few things about when sanctions are lifted. I mean, clearly it's not going to be the war ends and sanctions get lifted. I can envisage some kind of sanctions being placed on Russia for years, if not decades, to come. I think one big fight, which can actually be easily solved, is we have a lot of money frozen in the West from the Russian central bank. I think the theory at the moment is that we will give it back once Russia pays reparations. Well, we can get around that quite easily by simply taking the money and using it to pay for the reparations ourselves, pay for the repair, rather than having it to go back to Russia first. It seems quite a simple solution. But I think my point that I was making in my speech is that you can imagine a situation where some of the more minor players or some of the oligarchs, the sanctions will be lifted once the aggression stops, if they are seen to be a bit player or not so close to Putin. But that could be very dangerous because, of course, once those sanctions are lifted, then there could be then they could become a player simply because of the fact that they're unsanctioned and then can be utilized for whatever the Russia regime wants. So there are many pitfalls I think we need to look at in the future. On the second point that Nigel mentions about, well, there may be other routes, Iran, China, Dubai, that monies and materials can pass through. That is, of course, true and is always going to be true. But I think the interesting thing about Central Asia is that it is, in a lot of those countries, an area where we do have some kind of influence. I just fear that we're not really paying attention to it and not really using that influence as best we could at the moment.
Leila?
Yeah, I think we've for far too long have been looking at Central Asia through the prism of Russia and weren't really looking at Central Asia by itself. And hence a lot of the things that have been happening there haven't been addressed and haven't been really properly researched. And we have, it seems like, much less understanding about the region, about things that are happening there, and about the approaches that can be used. we have much less knowledge about that than we have knowledge about Russia. And for some reason, there is also, I noticed, a lack of understanding that Central Asia is actually, of Russia, which is, multiplied by, I don't know, 200 maybe, in terms of how worse it is, and in terms of how bad the corruption is, and in terms of how bad the persecution against the activists is. It's just that it's less read about, it's less written about. To address one of the questions in the chat, I don't remember who asked, but about the possible solutions for solving the issue with, to kind of motivate Central Asia to not trade with Russia as actively as right now, is probably to assess the possibility of motivating the Central Asian states to leave the Eurasian Economic Union. And I don't know how realistic it is. I don't know how long this idea can take to develop. But I think that is one of the excuses that is being used by the Central Asian states, basically, when they tell you or tell the Western countries that, sorry, but we can't not trade because we're members of this economic union, so maybe they should leave. It's or maybe I'm thinking about it way too simply. So, yeah.
Thank you, Leila. Nurul?
Okay, I have 2 points to add, and again, back to my favorite, civil society. I really believe that there's a great window opportunity of civil society to take more active role, and following even up with the governments, with the structures that are involved with monitoring of sanctions. And probably perhaps it's been already taken into consideration, since I heard there'll be a summit C+1 this September, where President Biden has invited already leaders of Central Asia. At least I heard about Tokayev. So maybe civil society can also take active part in that and bring up those issues to call for more transparency.
That's it, Noor. Thank you. Thank you so much. So unfortunately, I mean, we need to conclude. I would like to thank our panelists for sharing with us their knowledge on this very timely topic, which, as you have shown today, is really at the intersection of so many issues, and I bet the discussions could go on. We couldn't address all the questions, but we might consider having one more event in the coming months on this topic. So I would also like to thank our audience for being with us today and for all your questions, and we really look forward to seeing you again and having you again in one of our upcoming Central Asia Program seminars. Thank you very much. Have a good day or have a good evening. Goodbye.